Hi my lovelies and welcome back to my channel. So obviously this is a brand new channel. Like I said in my previous video, I'd really like it if you could give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below. It would mean the absolute world. So if you don't already follow me on Instagram, I will link it down below here. On there is kind of everything to do with, you know, beauty, skincare, me, the life of the boys, just kind of like everything that we get up to as a family. It's like our little journey. Obviously every time a video goes live it will be popped up on Instagram page, so if you haven't already, like my Instagram page, give it a follow and you'll know every time a video has gone live. On my Instagram channel I have spoken quite a lot actually about Jordan's story, which is my youngest baby. He was born with a heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot, which means there are 4 problems wrong with his heart. I'll go into detail later on in the video about what it is that's wrong, but I have my notes. So it's quite a while ago and I've got all my notes. So on the Instagram post there have been so many lovely comments and so much love from so many lovely people, just kind of saying how strong we are as a family, how much they admire us, and thank you for sharing this. So there has been a few video requests to have a video like this be put into detail, so this could take it over to 2 videos. If it does, I will do part 1 and part 2. So I'm going to firstly talk about the pregnancy side of things. We found out we was expecting JJ on the 10th of February 2019. Everything was kind of going fine. We had our midwife appointments, you know, where they kind of take bloods, they take samples of your urine just to make sure everything's going okay, and that was all fine. I think it was my second midwife appointment. The midwife thought expecting JJ to be a lot smaller than Oliver really, but you know, you can't tell that early on. This was probably about 10-11 weeks. So we had our 12-week appointment come through for the ultrasound, for the scan, and as far as they could see everything was absolutely fine. He was measuring, well obviously we didn't know he was going to be a boy at that point, but he was measuring absolutely fine. Everything was looking good, everything was, you know, going along so smoothly. There was no problems, no complications, there was nothing. It was just going, it was just a dream pregnancy to start with. Went up to the 20-week scan. Like I say, beforehand everything was, it was brilliant, it was lovely. Charlie was excited to be a big brother. Oliver just didn't understand what was going on. He, you know, Oliver was just too young to understand, so he just kind of knew there was a baby in mummy's belly and that's about it. We got to the 20-week scan and to start with everything was going fine. You know, they measured the fluid behind the baby's neck. That all measured absolutely fine. He, you know, it was just going good. It was just going good. And then it kind of came to the part where she wanted to obviously scan over his heart to make sure his heart had formed properly, as they do with every pregnancy. But he was laying in a very awkward position, so she couldn't actually see him, well, see the heart anyway. So she asked me to get in all these kind of weird positions. So I was standing over the bed, kind of lean on it with my elbows, and then like having to shake my bum and my belly to see if that would get him to move. So I did that for about 5 minutes, got back onto the bed, she continued to scan, and there was a slight movement but not enough for anyone to see. So then I had to, bearing in mind, like I say, I was quite big quite early on, so by 20 weeks I probably looked about 30 odd weeks pregnant. So I was laying on the bed and I had to lift my bum off the bed using my feet, and I had to shake my belly around which obviously if you're a mum you will know when you're pregnant you feel like you need to pee all the time anyway, so this was really hard to do. But yeah, it just got to the point where I was doing all these kind of silly positions. I went for a walk, I had some cold water, I went for a wee, I did so much stuff, and we went back into the room and he still hadn't moved. He'd moved in the tiniest bit, but she just couldn't get a clear picture. So she told us to come back, that she would rebook an appointment to come back so they could scan the heart another day. We were quite lucky and we were back within 2 to 3 days. So we went into a room, it was a completely different room, new people, and that's when they noticed that there was a problem. So The lady that did the scan, she said that she thinks that there's a problem with baby's heart. We asked, you know, what's wrong, is everything okay? And she was quite vague, she was very, very vague. So she just kind of got up from her desk, you know, from the ultrasound area, and said she was going to call for a second opinion. So a second person comes in the room and he confirms that there's definitely something wrong with baby's heart and that would need to go see a specialist. So originally, having Jordan, we were booked in the Queen's Medical Centre, so everything was kind of done there. So 2 days later we were brought back in. I think by this point it was the Wednesday. We went in and we saw a consultant, and he's quite good at looking for problems on scans, and he confirmed that there was definitely a problem. The sonographers were really, you know, did a really good job in finding Jordan's heart condition, because he was small and obviously his heart's quite small, it was really small to find. They said, you know, it's lucky that we found it. It could have gone, you know, undiagnosed really. So yeah, we saw the consultant and he wasn't quite sure what it would. He had you know, he kind of had an opinion of what it could be, but he wasn't 100% sure. So we were referred over to the Leicester Royal Hospital, which is where I actually had Charlie and Oliver, so very familiar, kind of knew my way around, knew some of the, you know, sonographers and the doctors and stuff, because my pregnancy with Charlie was very high risk. So we got to the Leicester Royal a few days after. Into the room, we had another scan, and this lady that scanned me, she was amazing. Most doctors know her and they know she is top of the game. She is kind of like one of the best in the field of this kind of area. So, you know, we carried on with the scan and she said that there's definitely a problem. I'm kind of laid there asking 1,000,001 questions, and she just kind of told me to politely be quiet, and just wait until after the scan, and then she would talk us through everything that was wrong. So after the scan, you know, I kind of wiped all the gel off my belly, pulled myself together, got my clothes back on properly, and she started to draw a diagram of a heart. So she drew a normal diagram of a heart and then she drew a different heart, and that's when she confirmed that Jordan had tetralogy of Fallot. Tetralogy of Fallot, it basically means there are 4 problems with the heart. Once she kind of said it was tetralogy of Fallot, she just drew a diagram and showed the difference between a healthy heart and a heart with tetralogy of Fallot. Like I say, there's 4 problems wrong with his heart, so it was an awful lot to take in. So we had the scan and we kind of felt relieved in one way, because we'd spent two or 3 days kind of panicking, thinking what could possibly be wrong, what could it be. But on the other hand, we were relieved because we now know what it is and we kind of know what we're dealing with. So on this particular appointment with this specialist, who confirmed and diagnosed Jordan with tetralogy of Fallot, we kind of went through the birth plan, what would happen at the birth plan, at the birth, what his life expectancy would be, if he would need surgery straight away, if he could do just normal everyday activities for a child, like can he run, can he play sports, you know, is he going to be able to walk properly, or is he going to be out of breath because he has a heart condition. There was just so much going on. It was an emotional roller coaster. It was, looking back, it was really upsetting, but it was kind of, like I say, we knew what we was dealing with, so there was kind of like a light at the end of the tunnel. She did say he may need surgery straight after birth, but they wouldn't know that until obviously I'd given birth and they assessed Jordan. She advised that we took a tour around the neonatal intensive care unit at the QMC, which is the Queen's Medical Centre, and also have a tour of the NICU over at the Glenfield. We went for the tour straight away at the Glenfield. That was kind of an emotional on its own. It was, oh, I have no idea why I'm tearing up at this. I think it's just kind of like thinking back to it, but walking in, it's so overwhelming. You know, the ladies were lovely, like there was no faults with them at all. So they showed us kind of like the kitchen areas where you can store breast milk or formula, anything like that. They showed us the playrooms, obviously if baby's a bit older and he can play with toys, then there was a play area for him. They showed us kind of where the bays are, the beds, the wards, the private rooms. There was actually some rooms upstairs above the ward for parents who, obviously whose babies were ill. I mean, a lot of these children were going up to the age of 14. I mean, I don't know if there were any older ones than that, but I think the eldest we saw was a 14-year-old boy. So yeah, there's rooms upstairs for the parents to stay, obviously, while their baby child is being taken care of, basically, or they've had an operation, things like that. So yeah, it was overwhelming, it was scary, it was, you know, it gave you a bit of panic, but you also felt reassured because you kind of knew the layout of how everything would be when you get there and what to kind of expect, and you kind of get a little meet and greet with some of the nurses and the doctors, and they were outstanding. I mean, we brought them cakes and all sorts. We went a bit over the top with them. They were just fantastic. So he was diagnosed with the Trilogy Fellow, and we had the tour of the Glenfield NICU unit. So the next few days was a bit, you know, mixed of emotions. So we had to put a brave face on for the boys, obviously, because they don't understand what's going on. We didn't want to tell them what was going on until we had to. So we just kind of kept everything as normal as possible, but inside we were hurting, and we didn't know if the outcome was going to be good or if it was going to be bad. We just hoped for the best and just kind of not let ourselves get too excited, because you just never know what's around the corner, but still have a bit of excitement there so you can enjoy the pregnancy and not feel like a really heavy weight on your shoulders. After we had the appointment with the specialist over at Glenfield, she did kind of advise to have an amniocentesis just to kind of see if there was any other problems with baby. Sometimes, not all the time, a child that has a heart defect, it can be caused by another problem. So if, for example, baby had Edwards or Pato syndrome, or they had Down syndrome, 9 times out of 10 there can be a added problem and it can affect the heart. So she advised to have this amniocentesis just to kind of see if there was any reasons as to why Jordan had this problem. So we had it at about 24 weeks. That was scary, because obviously it carries a high risk of miscarriage. Obviously if you're over 20 weeks, then it is a bit safer. There's less chance of a miscarriage. We went for this amniocentesis. I just did not sleep the night before at all. It was so scary, so daunting, not knowing what's going to happen. Sitting there waiting for the amniocentesis, it was nerve-wracking. It was, come on, you know, let's get this done, let's get it over with, and at the same time it was, I don't want this to happen, I don't want to have it done, I just want to go home, I want to go to bed, and I just want to curl up and not move. The specialist that said that there is a problem, and we were really lucky to find it before sending us off to the Royal, he was one that carried out the amniocentesis. So he came, you know, with all his scrubs on, which is it makes you nervous to say the least. He came over, and so did our fetal medicine midwife. She was so lovely. She was almost like your friend. She was so lovely. She was like your friend, and she, you know, she was there to hold your hand and kind of walk you through everything that's going to happen, and she was like a shoulder to cry on. Obviously she's seen a lot of this kind of thing happen, and some babies actually had it a hell of a lot worse than JJ did, so credit to those parents 100%. But the midwife was just brilliant with us. We signed the consent form, and he also said if we wanted something called a microarray test. A microarray test is something that kind of helps find other problems in the chromosomes, and can kind of give you a rough idea if your child is going to have any kind of cancers. It's quite in depth, so we agreed to have that done as well. The amniocentesis is a fairly big needle. It's about this big. So the procedure is quite simple really. When you lay on the bed like you're going to have a normal ultrasound, they scan your belly. Then they cover it with a sheet. Once they find where the baby is and make sure that baby is still, they'll cover your belly with kind of like your sheet that you'd have in like in an operation, because technically it's an operation. So there's like a little patch, probably about this big, of skin showing, and basically what they have to do is they have to get through all the skin, the muscle, the tissue, and take out a sample of the amniotic fluid. But they have to miss baby, obviously, so that's the reason they scan. Once they've got a safe place to carry out the procedure, they just go ahead and do it straight away. It's quite uncomfortable. I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. It was quite uncomfortable. I definitely squeezed Nick's hand quite hard, but a lot of it was, you know, you work yourself up more in your head, but it is painful. Some people say it's not painful. I found it quite painful. So after the amniocentesis and the microarray, so the microarray it's not another procedure or anything. It is literally the amniotic fluid that they take from the amniocentesis. They will take a bit out of that and they will run the microarray test. So it's literally one procedure, but it does two results, two samples. So after the amniocentesis, we were taken into a private room. And we had to wait there for a good hour and a half. We were kind of given teas, coffees, biscuits, and I had to just relax. First hour after having an amniocentesis can be quite dangerous. Anything can happen within that hour, so they just want to make sure that you're not bleeding. They want to take another urine sample, so they take one before and they also want one after, just to kind of make sure you're okay. Sometimes after an amniocentesis you can get quite lightheaded, so they wanted to make sure that before I left the hospital I was absolutely fine. I could get from A to B quite good. For the first 24 hours after an amniocentesis you still have to take it really easy, so for me it was brilliant. Obviously not brilliant that I had the amniocentesis, but it kind of gives you a day off at the same time, which is the lighter way to look at it, I suppose. So we picked Charlie up from school and we just kind of said, look, you've got to be really careful with Mummy. Mummy's had, you know, something done to her belly just to make sure the baby's okay, and we can't play fight and we've got to be very, very careful and just let Mummy rest. So that was all fine. There was no complications with the amniocentesis. Fast forwarding on to about 28 weeks, I got up one morning and I went to the toilet as normal. When I wiped there was blood. So straight away we panicked and we rang the Queen's Medical Centre, and they said that we needed to come straight in and just kind of be observed and just see kind of what's going on. An ambulance was actually called out for me. So the boys were quite scared. Obviously they saw all these paramedics kind of coming into the house and taking Mummy away in an ambulance, but everything seemed to be absolutely fine. It was just a one-off, thankfully. It did kind of catch me off guard. I wasn't expecting to see anything like that. They said it was a one-off and I'd probably have a water infection or something, because that can make you bleed when you're pregnant. I was given some antibiotics, observed for a few hours and sent back home. Sometimes with children with heart defects there can be an additional problem with the brain. So another thing was added to our never-ending worry list of Jordan. So we were invited for a study on babies with heart conditions to see if it affects their brain. So we drove all the way over to Sheffield. They kind of paid for everything. They paid for all expenses. Luckily we didn't have to stay over or anything. It was just a few hour drive there and back. But the MRI being pregnant was really uncomfortable. They do prefer it if you lay on your back, because they get a better picture of the baby and everything else going on. I was quite far along at this point, so laying on my back was just not going to happen, and especially in a really small MRI machine. So I laid on my side. It was super loud. Nick was actually allowed in the room with me, but we had to have earplugs in because the machine is so loud. So I was in there for a good hour, and we got some amazing photos of Jordan. I mean, I'll put them here so you can have a look. It's quite creepy. One of them actually reminds me of Jeepers Creepers. Don't ask me why, I don't know. I think it's the eyes, because you can see the eyes, see his eyes. So yeah, that was an experience, an amazing experience as well. We never actually got the results from that, but we just kind of took it as no news is good news. Nothing was ever passed to our specialist or the doctors or anyone from the team that we had around us. So we all just kind of assumed everything was okay. And kind of fast forwarding on a bit, I went into hospital with, we actually took the boys to soft play. We kind of wanted to give them a really good day out before baby came along, and we went on the soft play, and me thinking it was a really good idea at 30+ weeks pregnant to go on the soft play with them. Didn't end very well. I got home and I was very crampy, definitely having labour-like pains. So we rang the triage unit at the QMC, and they told us to come in because there's a very high chance of it being a preterm labour. So we made our way down to the Queen's Medical Centre, and we were hooked up to the machines. It did show that there was a few kind of tightenings going on, but nothing that, you know, they were worried about. I mean, I was getting along, you know, nearly halfway through 30 weeks, so they weren't concerned. They just said I needed to take it easy and sent me on the way. So that was another little hiccup that kind of came along, and it does, but I think because, you know, he has a heart condition, you're constantly expecting something else to happen, and like I say, these contraction pains, it was like, oh my gosh, no, like, you can't come early, you need to stay in there. But luckily enough, it wasn't labour, it was just, I just done too much basically, and it just set off a few tightenings. So then we went to see our midwife, who's also a consultant, and she is, again, extremely good at this sort of thing. So we had a lot of scans from the minute we found out at 20 weeks that Jordan had Tetralogy all the way up until birth. We were having multiple scans. In a typical pregnancy, you just have your 12 and your 20-week scan through the NHS. Obviously, if you want additional scans, then you pay for it privately, but we had scans at least once a week. There'd sometimes be a few weeks where we didn't have to see anybody, but on the whole, we were there quite a lot. We also had a 4D scan done of Jordan by our midwife, our consultant. That was quite interesting. I'm really happy that I didn't pay for a 4D scan, because the placenta, the umbilical cord was kind of like over his face, so you could see his face. Because this was covering it, it wasn't a clear picture. So if we'd paid for it, it'd have been a waste of money basically. But yeah, that was brilliant. When I was about 35 weeks, and he was already measuring at 5 pounds and 8 ounces. So yeah, it was getting me a bit nervous, because I was thinking Oliver and Charlie had been small babies, kind of like an average size, and we were thinking at this point Jordan was going to be quite big, and we wasn't sure when he was going to make his entrance into the world. We also then went to see 2 other doctors and nurses and consultants, all in kind of one room, and that's when we discussed the birth plan. So as I said before, when we saw the consultant over at the Leicester Royal, they wasn't kind of sure what was going to happen after birth. We didn't know whether the operation would be straight away, if it would be a bit later on. Typically they wanted him to have his operation between 6 and 9 months. That's kind of the age they aim for. So at this point that's what they were going off. They were hoping it'd be 6 to 9 months. There wasn't kind of too much detail in there apart from we needed a special cot for JJ. A baby with heart problems, or if they're premature or anything like that, they need a specialist cot just so they can hook up these extra kind of machines to it to kind of help baby along until they get down to NICU, you know, in case they need to do anything really there and then. So they did say that was what they needed to have before they could induce me. They said being induced was probably a safer option for me if I didn't go into labour naturally by about 38 weeks. So they set a date and everything was good. I was also on blood thinning injections because when I was pregnant with Charlie I had 2 blood clots in my left lung. So throughout all my pregnancies I've had to have blood thinning injections. So it was just the normal, you know, if you think you're in labour, stop taking them and come in. So we left there, absolutely fine. You know, there's still quite a lot of detail that I'm missing out, but like I say, this video is going to be so long that I don't think there'll be time. So fast forward into about 37 weeks. When I got up one morning, I stayed over at my mum's, and I kind of noticed that he hadn't moved all day, and I was getting some really strong pains as well. So Nick was at work, so I gave Nick a call and said, look, you know, he hasn't moved all day, I'm quite worried. I've done the usual things, so the normal things that would get him moving anyway I tried, so like a warm shower. He loved showers and baths. He'd always get quite fidgety and he didn't move. I had an ice cold drink and that didn't work. I laid on my left hand side, that didn't work. Gave a poke and a prod, that didn't work. So it was at the point where I needed to call the hospital. So we rang the hospital and they said I needed to come in ASAP. So I made my own way there and Nick met me at the hospital. I was kept in overnight for observation. I was hooked up to the machine and he hadn't moved as much as they wanted to within the hour. So they kind of set an hour limit, and he had to move so many times for it to pass the criteria, and he wasn't. His heartbeat was absolutely fine, but his movements weren't great. So they had to keep a good eye on that for a good 24 hours. Whilst I was there, the midwife did give me a sweep. And straight away I had a bloody show and lost a lot of my plug. When she did the sweep I was already at 1 to 2 centimetres dilated. His head was nice and low, she could actually feel his head. It was all kind of looking good. We were just hoping that if I went into labour that this cot would be available. Once we kind of got out of the hospital, again they put the moving down to a possible infection. So they took some samples and there was a little bit of something in my urine, so they gave me more antibiotics to take. They brought my induction date forward by a week and said just to call up on the day, and if they have a cot then I can go in, if they don't then it will keep getting pushed back until they have this cot available. So my induction date was set for a Friday and I called them on Thursday because I was just getting too excited and there was no cot available. So we rang on the Friday, there was still no cot available. And at this point I'm in slow labour. So I'd had the contractions, I've got back pain. I actually had slow labour with both the boys for 2 to 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks of slow labour with Charlie and 2 weeks of slow labour with Oliver. So this wasn't new to me at all, it's just a pain in the ass. So whilst we're waiting for this cot, and obviously I'd gone over the 38-week mark, which is roughly when they wanted to induce me, I had to keep going back to the hospital for regular checkups and monitoring, just to make sure baby was okay, make sure that I was okay, to see if there was any irregular tightenings. And obviously being in slow labour, it was a bit of a concern. So there was constant monitoring on baby, but sadly there was no cot available. Kind of fast forwarding towards the end of the pregnancy, you know, apart from the slow labour, everything was fine. We took the kids out to soft play for the day and it was just a lovely day. We had a McDonald's, we went to soft play. This time I didn't play on the soft play at all because of obviously what happened last time. But yeah, it was lovely. The kids enjoyed it, and we kind of had a feeling this was probably going to be the last time that the kids would have one-on-one with me and Nick before the baby arrives. So we just wanted to make it a bit extra special for them. So we got home, we had an Asda order ready to collect, so Nick went and collected that while I kind of got the kids ready for bed. Nick got home, he unpacked the shopping, we got the boys ready for, like, finished getting them ready for. I started to read them a bedtime story in their bedroom, and for some reason I was sitting on the floor reading the story, and I was having quite a few niggles. This was probably about 6:30 at night. We hadn't eaten it, so the kids had had dinner whilst we was at soft play, and me and Nick didn't have anything. So once the kids were kind of settled, we ordered a Domino's in and put on my favourite Hollyoaks to watch TV, to eat dinner to. Just kind of having a really chilled night, and these niggles were kind of getting stronger. So at the start of Hollyoaks I had a contraction, then at the break on Hollyoaks I had a contraction, and then at the end of the programme I had another contraction. But because I'd been in slow labour for so long, I was just kind of thinking that's what it is. Nothing's going to come of it. You know, there'd been 2 occasions where I had very regular contractions, and then they just stopped altogether. So we kind of thought that was the same thing. Obviously when I was in hospital and I had the sweep, I was actually given some codeine for the contraction-like pains. So I took a codeine, went to bed, got an early night, and about 2 o'clock in the morning I woke up. The pains were quite strong. I remember, like, kind of sitting exactly where I am now, just kind of swaying side to side as you do when you're in labour. I'm just trying to ease the pains a little bit, and they just weren't easing, so I thought, right, I'll just go back to sleep, and when I wake up in the morning everything will be fine. Well, the kids woke up at about 6:30 in the morning, and they were quite happy just reading their books in their bed, laughing and giggling. They hadn't got up and came into the bedroom to kind of say, you know, Mummy, it's time to wake up now, let's go. So we were listening to them on the monitor, and me and Nick were just laying there giggling, listening to them. And then I had a almighty contraction, and a few minutes later I had another one, and a few minutes I had another one. So I said to Nick, I think it's time to start timing the contractions, because they're coming quite regular and they're ridiculously painful. So as the morning went on, the contractions were getting worse and worse. Charlie was quite worried. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he had a very worried look on his face, and he was kind of saying, Mummy, are you okay? You know, kind of like stroking my hair, making sure I was okay and stuff. It was so sweet, bless him. And we just kind of said, oh, you know, the baby's hurting Mummy, the baby's ready to come out now, so we're going to have to go to hospital. So my brother was kind of already on standby, because he was going to look after Charlie and Oliver whilst obviously I'm delivering Jordan at the hospital. So we kind of gave him a ring and just said, just stay on standby, I think I'm in labour, we might need you to come up soon. Then I had, I think, 2 or 3 contractions, but my contraction time had just like gone from 8 minutes apart to about 3-4 minutes apart by this point. And we rang the hospital, explained the situation, and they said, you need to come to the hospital now, start making your way now. So it hadn't even been 10 minutes since I last phoned my brother, and I rang him back and said, get ready, Nick's going to come pick you up, we're going to hospital. So I was on the phone to Nick the entire time I was in labour, and obviously I was at home with the boys on my own, which was not ideal, but it was the only option we had. My parents live about 20 minutes away, and Nick's parents live about 30-40 minutes away. The only closest point we had was my brother, who lived 5 minutes down the road. So Nick got in the car, he literally got there and back so fast. He was on the phone to me the entire time, timing my contractions, bless him, he was brilliant. And my brother got here, and I thought, no, I'm fine, I can have a shower, I'm going to have a shower and freshen up. Well, yeah, that wasn't going to happen. So it was Nick, bless him, quickly dashed around the house, grabbed all the last minute bits. So the bags were packed, he just needed to put in the chargers, some change, a cardigan, because I was quite happy to go in just the nightie that I was wearing and some bottoms. And we got in the car, and from where I live to the Queen's Medical Centre takes a good half an hour, 35 minutes. Sometimes a bit longer depending on how heavy the traffic is. We got there in just under 20 minutes, so the boy did good. So we got straight into the labour room, they were kind of all expecting me, and I got taken into my labour room. The first thing I was asked was to do a sample, which was ridiculously hard because I was just in full-blown labour at this point. It was contraction after contraction after contraction. I got to the toilet, said, I can't do a sample, like I'm in too much pain. At this point it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, so it hadn't been long since we'd got up and started timing the contractions. I said I couldn't do this sample for the midwife, and then I had a full-blown contraction and just kind of collapsed onto Nick. So the midwife told me to go sit on the bed. So I sat on the bed and she said, what do you want for pain relief? And I said, just gas and air, because I knew in myself that I was too far gone for an epidural. So I just said gas and air. She gave me the gas and air, and then she said, we're just going to have a check, see how far along you are, see how far dilated you are, and we'll go from there. And, you know, I was kind of laying on the bed in agony with my gas and air, puffing on it like there's no tomorrow. Nick's quickly messaging everyone saying, no, we've got here safe, we'll kind of keep you updated. And the midwife's there and she's having a really good dig around in there, and you know, she's like scooping and doing all this kind of motion, and I'm thinking, oh my god, I'm in this much pain and I'm probably only going to be like 3 or 4 centimetres or something. Well no, thank the Lord, I was 8 centimetres dilated by this point, near enough 9. And she could feel his head was very low, and that was that. By about 8:30 I was starting to get a bit of an urge to push, but nothing kind of overwhelming. Just kind of puffing on my gas and air, going along. It did feel like there was no break, I'm not gonna lie. I honestly thought there was no break in between these contractions. They were just coming thick and they were coming fast. At 9 o'clock I told the midwife I needed to push. So she said, if you need to push, you need to push. So she kept checking and checking, and you know, she was saying like, you know, I can see his head, it won't be long, da 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 da. Then my waters popped, and obviously I'm quite high on gas and air at this point, and I'm squeezing Nick's hand and I'm grabbing him by the neck, kind of pulling him down, and it felt as if my waters just exploded, but they flew across the whole of the birthing room. They didn't. That's what it felt like, because I was so off my head. I kind of shouted out quite loudly that he's coming, I'm pushing and he's coming. And the midwife kind of looks down and goes, oh my god. So she quickly puts on her apron and she puts on a glove. She only has time to put a glove, half a glove on her hand, and his head's out. So JJ, his head came out and his arm came out all in one go, kind of doing the Superman pose. And yeah, so she rang the emergency buzzer, and I remember her shouting, I need another midwife, I'm not prepared, and baby's here. And within one more push, Jordan had entered the world, and he came into the world at 9:08, and it was amazing. It was so good. Nick let a few tears out, bless him, which made me cry. I was really, really lucky to have skin-to-skin contact with JJ, albeit it was only 2 minutes because they had to take him down to the NICU. But yeah, I got 2 minutes of skin-to-skin contact. He came out weighing 6 pounds, 9 ounces. It was just the best moment of my life. As any mums out there know, the minute your baby is handed to you, nothing else matters in the world. It is just a magical, beautiful, amazing moment, and oh, I would do it all over again in a heartbeat, I really would. His labour was amazing, to say the least. I loved every minute of it. Even though it was painful, I loved it. Nick didn't really get to have a cuddle, but he got to cut the cord, and they popped him on this special cart, which miraculously they did have. But I think obviously they save a few to the side in case the ladies, you know, kind of go into labour naturally. But yes, they had a cot and he was taken down to NICU. So we didn't really get to see much of him, just the 2 minutes, which is heartbreaking, but we know he needs to be assessed. We need to make sure he's okay. You know, he comes before me 100%. So whilst JJ is down in NICU, I'm being checked over by the midwife, and she says that I do need stitches because I tore. I had a 2nd degree tear with JJ, I had second degree tears with Charlie and Oliver as well, so again, nothing new to me. Because it was a second degree tear, the midwife wasn't allowed to do it herself. She had to have a doctor present, and the doctor had to do this, you know, stitch me up basically. So while they were waiting for the doctor, they kind of left me on the bed, cleaned me all up, and gave me some tea and toast. So I had some tea and toast, and the doctor came and, you know, they kind of gave me some anaesthetic. So I had the anaesthetic, and, you know, before the anaesthetic is even worse because, you know, they're really scraping inside. You've just given birth and they're kind of pulling you apart again to have a look how deep the tear is and see how many stitches you're going to need roughly. So all that happened, I had the anaesthetic, and I can remember the midwife saying, oh, they were ready to stitch you up now, we're just going to make sure the anaesthetic's taken effect. And she pinched me down below, and I pretty much jumped off the bed and said, yeah, it's not taken effect yet. So that was quite a bit of a funny moment. But yeah, once I was fully numb, they carried out the stitches. They did the stitches. Nick was having a really good look. He was just behind the doctor, kind of like pulling all these funny faces, and I'm laying there, you know. Dignity has well and truly come back, and all I want to do is just cover my face and the ground to swallow me up whole, because it's not nice having it done. After I've kind of been stitched up and I've had my tea and toast, the midwives actually come in and say that Jordan's very hungry, would it be okay to feed him? Because I had the codeine tablet the night before for the pain, I wasn't allowed to breastfeed because I'd have had too much of the drug in my breast milk. So they gave him a bottle of Cow and Gate, and they came back to report that he had pretty much drank the whole lot. So he was feeding really, really well. Then, before we could go and see him, I had to go to the toilet. I had to give them a urine sample just to kind of make sure things were okay, and that was crazy. I wasn't looking forward to doing it anyway because I'd torn and it can be quite painful. Luckily, with all my pregnancies, I have a craving for water. So my pee was very diluted and it was like water coming out of me. So going to the toilet was fine, but I passed a very, very large clot. I know it wasn't anything to do with the placenta, because once I'd delivered the placenta and they checked it all, the placenta was intact. It was a really healthy placenta. So I'd basically passed a clot that was about this big. I don't know if you can see that. It was probably about this big in size. It was fairly big. It was about this thick. It was quite painful to pass. So I kind of came out the toilet, left it in the cardboard bowl that they provided, and I called Nick and said, I'm a bit scared, go and look in the toilet. And he was like, oh my god. My midwife who delivered JJ came back in the room and we explained what had happened. So she kind of then went running out and grabbed the doctor. Bear in mind, I'd just been stitched up and I'm still on the gas in there because the after pains for each baby get worse the more you have, and they are pretty much identical to contraction pain. So it feels like you're still in labour. So I'm puffing on this gas in there, more so now because the doctor that came in said that he needed to give me an internal examination just to kind of make sure that there's no more clots in there. He pretty much went about here inside, scraping out clots. It was really, really painful. I was in so much distress with it. I was crying, I was terrified, it was painful. You know, I just pushed a baby out, I delivered the placenta, I've been stitched, and now this is happening. That bit wasn't the nice bit. It was quite scary, but he pulled out quite a few clots. I think it was about 8 or 9 clots. But luckily they were all a lot smaller than the original big clot that I'd passed. And then probably about 20 minutes after that we got to see JJ. And the minute I saw him I just cried. I cried so much. You know, he was laying there in this cot and he had all these wires on him. But he was here, he was safe, and that is where I'm going to leave this video because I'm tearing up. I'm going to leave the video here. I will do a part 2 about, you know, the NICU, his first few days and bits and bobs, and I will insert some pictures just so you can kind of see what I'm kind of talking about. But yeah, thank you so much for watching guys, and if you enjoyed this video please give it a thumbs up.